Question number 31. Which of the following statements is false? A valid test is a reliable test. B, a valid test is a useful test. C, a reliable test may or may not be a valid test. Or D, an unreliable test is never valid. And the correct answer is letter B. A valid test is a useful test. Ha? Paano may mali yun? Di ba pag valid, di dapat useful siya? Well, not really. Kasi, yun nga, it depends on the context. Let's see, for psychometric properties, we have three important psychometric properties. When we say psychometric properties, these are the things that are important for a test or particular tool to be really useful in our field. Like, if it doesn't have reliability and validity, don't use it. That's unethical, you know. If you look at this triangle, it's a hierarchy, no? So first, you should satisfy reliability. Unless it's reliable, it cannot be valid. So imagine mo na lang ganito. May nangliligaw sa'yo. Sabi niya, mahal ka niya. Oh. Ngayon, tatest mo kung valid ba yun, no? Mahal ba talaga ako nito? So first, look at the consistency. Lagi ba siyang nandyan? Baka naman, minsan chinachat ka. Minsan, limot ka na. Minsan, ang landi-landi sa'yo. Minsan, sa iba. So, walang reliability. So, paano mo masasabing accurate niya na mahal ka talaga niya kung hindi nga siya consistent? So, kailangan maging consistent muna and precise yung test mo bago siya maging valid. And of course, it cannot be useful if it's not valid. Think about this. Depression test. Yung depression test, minsan na-identify niya yung mga depressed, minsan mali. Kaso mas madalas siyang mali. Hindi siya reliable. Hindi siya valid. Hindi mo alam kung depression ba talaga yung mini-measure nito. Baka naman anxiety, baka naman sadness lang or grief. So, hindi rin siya valid. So, paano siya magiging useful? Hindi mo siya magagamit, right? So, in this triangle, you just remember it. You must satisfy the bottom one up to the highest one. Parang mas close triangle lang yun, no? Start with the bottom, now we're here. So, ganun lang yun. Reliability, validity, and then utility. The standard deviation is generally considered the most useful measure of blank. The statement above is an example of blank. A, multiple choice. B, completion item. C, matching item. Or D, none of the above. The correct answer is letter B, completion item. Completion item siya because you are completing the statement. So, ano bang pinagkaiba-iba nitong tatlo? With multiple choice, ito yan. Yung sinitake yung test, multiple choice yan. A, B, C, D. Pag may choices ka, multiple choice yan. Completion item, pag kinukompleto mo yung statement. So, dito, in this case, kinukompleto natin yung statement. So, it's a completion item. Matching naman, you are matching. Alam ko, marami na kayong experience na test. May nasa left side, tapos i-connect nyo dun sa nasa right side. That's an example of matching item. We have this item format and the example. So, for multiple choice, itong PA drill, as I've said earlier. For binary choice, true or false. Binary means two. Two choice item, binary. Completion item, this is yung item na sinasagot natin, you complete the statement. Essay, I'm sure alam nyo na essay. Explain why psychological assessment is important in society, minimum of 500 words. So, I'm pretty sure you've all written lots of essays in your lives. Column A, personality test. Alin yun dyan? Yun yung NEO-PI-R. Basically, ano ba yung NEO-PI-R? Yan yung big five, no? Neuroticism, extroversion, openness, personality inventory revised. NEO-PI-R. Intelligence test. Ano dyan intelligence? SB 5. Kasi, Stanford, Binet, 5th edition. Projective. Rorschach. Rorschach yan. Alam niyo yan, Rorschach. That's a very popular test. Level A test. Ano ba level A test? It requires 0 training. So, that is quiz. So, sasabihin nyo, sir, personality test din naman yung Rorschach. Well, kasi sa matching, di ba, di naman pwedeng doble-doble. So, or sometimes, as if indicated, pero in this case, mas accurate sa personality test yung NEO-PI kasi may projective test na option sa column A. Jane's need for affiliation is higher than her need for achievement. Which scoring technique would allow us to make this conclusion? A. Class scoring. B. Ipsative scoring. C. Category scoring. Or D. Cumulative scoring. And the correct answer is letter B, ipsative scoring. So ano bang pinagkaiba-iba nito? Sa cumulative scoring, the higher the score of the test, the higher the test taker is on the ability, trait, or other characteristics that the test purports to measure. So basically, kung naka 86 ka sa board exam, we can conclude using cumulative scoring that you are better in terms of psychometric knowledge as compared dun sa nakascore ng 76. Kasi naka 86 ka. That's cumulative scoring. Class scoring is that test takers' responses earn credit toward placement in a particular class or category, with other test takers whose pattern of response is presumably similar in some way. So let's say with depression, we use class scoring. For instance, nag-take ka ng depression scale. And so, depending on the symptoms and your score in that particular test, maybe maka-classify ka as mild depression or severe depression. So, depende sa score mo, naka-classify ka depending on your level, no? Ipsative scoring, it is comparing a test taker's score on one scale within a test to another scale within that same test. So, let's say, nag-take ka ng a motivational test and the test wants to find out what motivates you. Are you motivated by power, by affiliation, or by achievement? And with ipsative scoring, what we do is that we compare each of those scales depending on what you prioritize or value. So, kung instance, tinanong ka, line A, statement A, I love spending time with my family. And then, statement B, I love spending time with my career. And then, ang binulugan mo yung career mo. So, mas pinili mo yung career kaysa sa pag-ibig or sa family. So yun, ina-ask kung alin dun yung mas bina-value mo. So, dito lang example lang, ipsative scoring. Ano lang talaga siya, parang pipili ka lang. Hindi pwedeng, I choose both. No. If you have to choose between those two statements. So, para malaman kung ano yung mas mabigat at mas patimbang sa'yo. So, that's an example of ipsative scoring. You spent all night studying for your final exam in abnormal psychology, chapters 1 to 18. However, during the exam, only chapter 1 to 10 were included in the test items. In this scenario, you might complain about the test: A. Face validity, B. Content validity, C. Construct validity, or D. Predictive validity. The correct answer is letter B, content validity. Huh? Di ba? Parang tama naman lahat, pero hindi face validity. Well, unang-una, yes, it might seem correct na, kala ko final exam, di ba dapat achievement test? Dapat matest yung accomplishment and achievement ko sa website para malaman na naintindihan ko talaga siya. Yeah, it makes sense, no? But, hindi siya ganun ka-accurate. Mas accurate po ang content validity because we are here talking about the representativeness of the test. With your final exam, we want to figure out your achievement in ABSITE, which is chapter 1 to 18. However, dahil kulang yung items na nilagay ni Sir, hindi siya nag-represent nung construct na tinatry natin i-measure, which is your achievement in the test. So, pwede rin siyang construct validity and pwede rin siyang predictive validity. Let's say, we want to measure your achievement, no? Pero dahil nakatulog ka kagabi, chapter 1 to 10 lang yung inaral mo. Kasi jackpot ka, yun lang yung lumabas sa exam, so na-perfect mo. So, in terms of construct validity, did it really measure your achievement in ABSITE? Right? And next is predictive, right? How would this predict that? Like, kung di mo naman talaga siya na-gets, chapter 1 to 10 lang. Tapos, nag-clinical psychology ka na kasi nga, nakapasa ka bigla nung exam, nakapasa ka na nung course. Hihina yung predictive validity niya as when you predict it as a way to predict the performance in clinical psychology later on. In this case, tama naman siya lahat, pero ang pinaka-appropriate is the content validity. As a psychometrician, you developed a test regarding a person's likes and dislikes for various household products. You develop which of the following tests? A. Attitude, B. Values, C. Interest, or D. Preference. The correct answer is letter C, interest. So preference, wala yan, no? Although it's a real word, it's not operationally defined, so keme-keme ko lang yan. So yung tatlo, no? Values, interest, and attitude. It's very typical na nakakalito siya kasi mag-overlap siya. But again, values is about what's important to you. Like, interest is about your likes and dislikes. And your attitude is your learned disposition to react in some characteristic manner to a particular stimulus. Of course, it could include your likes and dislikes. Pero in this case kasi, mas accurate ang interest measure in terms of operational definitions. With attitude, maybe tanong ka like, are you more a Republican or a Democrat? Or kung typical sa Pinas, dilawan ka ba o DDS ka or pulahan ka? Yung mga, that's an example of attitude. During BLEP, one of your fellow examinees began screaming loudly out of extreme nervousness. This is an example of A. Human error, B. Random error, C. Systematic error, D. Standardization error. The correct answer is letter B. Random error. So, parang human error naman siya, no? Kasi parang it's caused by a human being. Why is that human error? Well, wala kasing ganyang term. Wala rin standardization error. Keme ko lang yan. Meron lang tayong random error and systematic error. What do we mean by that? So, imagine mo ngayon itong weighing scale. So, ngayon, yung weighing scale may daya, may dagdag ng 50 grams. So, pagpunta mong palengke, bumili kang 1 kilong baboy, ang nakuha mo lang 950 grams. That is an example of systematic error because ang may problema ay sa device. Kahit anong kiluhin mo doon, baboy, manok, baka, lagi yan may plus 50 grams. In our context, let's say nag-i-exam ka sa math, tinanong ka, si Jose at si Maria. Si Jose, bumili ng 5 mansanas kay Maria. Ang isang mansanas ay 5 piso. Magkano ang kinita ni Katrina? A. 50 pesos, B. 25, huh? Naman, it doesn't really matter kung ano yung choices kasi the question itself doesn't make sense. Bumili si Jose kay Maria tapos tinatanong mo ako magkano ang kinita ni Katrina and hindi natin alam yung relasyon nila sa isa't isa. So in that case, kahit sinong test taker pa yan, henyo man o hindi, trained man sa math o hindi masasagot yung tanong na yan. So that is an example of a systematic error. Everybody experiences the error. It's a problem with the device or the system or the test. That's why it's called systematic error. Random error naman, yan na yun. Yung may sumigaw bigla habang nag-exam ka o kaya nag-exam ka ng board exam, puyat ka, so hindi mo talaga nakuha yung true score mo or mababa yung nakuha mong score kasi mas mahina yung reasoning powers and cognitive abilities mo. Much worse, habang nag-board exam, nakatulog ka. So, ang baba ng score na nakuha mo. So, that's an example of random error. In test, retest, in general, the greater the interval between two administrations, the correlation between the scores obtained on each testing, blank, A, increases, B, decreases, C, they are equal, or D, it depends. The correct answer is letter B, decreases. Why it depends? In some way, it makes sense. It depends naman. Depende naman sa context. But then again, in the question, if you read carefully, I'm asking in general. It's true na in some circumstances, your reliability might increase. In some circumstances, it might be equal. But in general, it will decrease. Let's say, again, let's go back to the weighing scale. This time, we're talking about humans. Let's say, nag-kilo ako ngayong araw. And ang nasa weighing scale lang na-indicate is 78 kilograms. Oh, hindi yun ang weight ko ha. This is just an example. 78 kilograms. Kinamagahan, nag-kilo ako ulit. So, probably, ang kilo ko ulit kinamagahan is 78 kilograms. So, if mag-test, retest reliability ka with that and you start to calculate the numbers, medyo mataas yung makuha mong reliability. Right? Kasi, hindi masyado nagbago yung score. But what if we wait for 1 year? So, nag-kilo ako today, 78 kilograms. Tapos, nag-gym ako, nagpapayat ako for 1 year, naging 60 na lang ako. Within that 1 year, mag-test, retest ka, i-calculate mo yung numbers, ang layo na. 78, 60 pag kinumpare mo siya. So baka ma-conclude mo na yung device mo or yung weighing scale hindi reliable. When in fact, there was just a random error that occurred. Accurate naman sana talaga yung weighing scale, kaya lang pumayat lang talaga yung test taker. So it decreases. So in general, it will decrease. Because we forget. Let's say nag-exam ka ngayon sa board exam, you take it again after 2 years nang hindi ka nagre-review, probably your score will probably decrease. So that's only in general, no? But still, it depends. That's why you should be able to figure out the ideal length for the test retest, depending on your context. Sometimes, too short is not bad. Let's say in babies, maximum 4 days yan kasi they grow really fast. But in certain test takers, like in older people, you don't really want to really wait too long kasi baka mamatay, mahirap na. For young people, maybe you can take longer, like 6 months or 1 year. For cancer patients, you might really not take 10 years for test retest because that's really long. So that depends on your participants, depending on your context as a researcher or a developer. A typing test with a limit of 1 minute has been used by a psychometrician to measure the speed and accuracy of typing for a clerical applicant. Which of the following reliability estimate would be most appropriate? A. Chromebook Alpha, B. KR20, C. KR21, or D. Alternate forms. The correct answer is letter D, alternate forms. So, why can't we use an inter-item consistency estimate? Una-una, obviously hindi siya Chromebook Alpha kasi it's a speed and accuracy test. We are also measuring accuracy. It's a dichotomous test, there is right or wrong. Bakit hindi siya KR20 or KR21? Because it's a speed test, right? And in a speed test, according to Cohen and Swerdlich, they said that you should not use a single administration reliability estimate for speed test because your reliability coefficient, your results would be overestimated. Why? Because it's a speed test. The items are too easy. And when it's too easy, there is a chance that your participants will get a perfect score. So what if all your test takers got a perfect score? What would happen? You would have a KR20 or KR21 of 1, right? Your reliability would be really high. Maybe 0.98, 0.99, or 1 even. So it's too high, it's an overestimation, and it becomes meaningless in that sense. Again, an acceptable reliability is 0.7 to 0.9. But getting a 0.99 really is something must be definitely wrong with that test. The items are just too similar. So we use alternate forms because you want to measure reliability by administering an equal but not the same test because there is still an accuracy issue and yung familiarity nga ng test takers. Pwede rin namang test, retest, but again, do you have really time for that? Papabalikin mo pa yung applicants for a 1 minute speed test? Just do an alternate forms. In which of the following tests would an item analysis be inappropriate? A. Achievement test, B. Personality test, C. Speed test, or D. Power test. The correct answer is letter C, speed test. Again, we analyze items so that we can improve the test. A good item discriminates really well. And with achievement and power test, you can really do that, even with personality test. Like, makidistinguish mo pa rin, like, kung sino ang introverted sa extroverted, or madidistinguish mo pa rin kung sino yung may certain trait, like, kung sino yung qualified na psychometrician, and kung sino yung hindi. Magagawa mo yun dun sa A, B, and D. But with speed test, it's really difficult because the odds of the item being answered correctly by all participants are really high. Because we are testing speed, not exactly accuracy or correctness. And with speed, what if yung item 1 mo, tama lahat, natama ng lahat? So would you conclude na, difficulty index 1, discrimination index niyan 0, this item is bad, let's remove it. Baka maging end up mo niyan, yung speed test mo, wala ng items kasi na-delete mo na lahat. Kasi lahat tumatama dun sa speed test. Kasi nga, you are measuring speed, not really accuracy. So yeah, an item analysis would be inappropriate in this case. So might as well do something else, like, alternate forms. During test development, blank is conducted to examine item fairness for all prospective test takers. A. Sensitivity review. B. Expert panel. C. Test fairness. Or D. Fairness review. The correct answer is letter A, sensitivity review. So this is just a question of definition. No? Yung fairness review, keme-keme ko lang yan, wala talagang ganyan. In sensitivity review, test fairness is what we are trying to establish. And yung expert panel, sila yung nagkakonduct ng sensitivity review. So by definition, sensitivity review is, it is a study of test items in which items are examined for fairness to all prospective test takers, and for the presence of offensive language, stereotypes, or situations. Sensitivity. How sensitive are the items? Baka naman nakaka-offend ka na ng ibang tao, di ba? Chilla. If Melanie, a researcher, is interested in identifying the specific mental processes that constitute intelligence, which of the following theories should Melanie focus on investigating? A. Interactionism. B. Factor analytic. C. Information processing. Or D. Multiple intelligence. The correct answer is letter C. So again, we discussed this already. Interactionism, if you want to investigate the relationship between heredity and environment in developing intelligence. Factor analytic is when you want to use factor analysis and conduct correlation tests and all that with pre-established tests and ideas. And information processing is when you want to identify mental processes to study intelligence. So how do we process information and all that? So in this case, this is information processing. Crystallized intelligence is in which stratum of Carroll's theory of cognitive abilities? A. First. B. Second. C. Third. D. Fourth. Correct answer is letter B, second. So makikita dito there are three stratums, no? The first, the second, and the third. So in the first stratum, we have the G. Second stratum, we have GF, GC, YV, URST, and the below one are the speed factors or the level factors. So if you look at this table, kasi dahil factor analytic kasi si Carroll, factor analytic theories tend to develop over time. They build on one another. So Carroll built on Spearman's G, and he added something and built on Cattell's work. So in this case, we have the three stratum, and makikita nyo dito sa table, may mga red and green, no? So yung red, yung dalawang red, those are the differences between the two. Mapapansin nyo, may pinagkaiba sila sa terms and sa shortcuts, like broad visual perception is V, while for Cattell-Horn, they're using visual processing, but they mean the same things. So, yung red din yung pinagkaiba nila, that's where they deviated from one another. So, general memory and learning, quantitative processing, yun naman yung wala kay Carroll. Facility with reading and writing, wala nun kay Carroll. And itong processing and decision speed, wala naman nun kay Cattell-Horn. So, what McGrew and Flanagan did is that he tried to integrate these two, which is the green parts. So, ayan, nakikita nyo, kung saan sila nag-overlap, yan yung mga white. And with this, quantitative processing, mukhang namayagpag dito si Cattell-Horn, and namayagpag na naman yung reading and writing, and yung decision speed, yun naman yung inadapt from Carroll. However, inomit ni McGrew and Flanagan yung G, because they try to develop this kind of integration for psychoeducational evaluation purposes. And for them, G has no practical utility in that context. So, they remove that. The reason why McGrew and Flanagan omitted the G factor of intelligence in their model was because A. They believe it does not exist. B. It lacked practical utility in psychoeducational evaluations. C. It lacked practical utility in clinical evaluations. And D. They did not omit it. The correct answer is letter B. It lacked practical utility in psychoeducational evaluations. So I said earlier, he tried to compile and connect, integrate the established factor analytical work that already existed and use it for their own purposes, and then they came up with the conclusion that it has no practical utility. But it's still widely used today. Remember that, even with Stanford Binet, they are still using the G, even with Wexler, I think. But for McRae and Flanagan, they developed their own ways, and that's psychology. We differ, experts differ in a lot of ways. So when you study intelligence, I recommend, for those of you aspiring to become a psychometrician and pass the board exam, when you study psychological assessment, you should study the differences among the experts, especially in personality and intelligence, because that's where the controversies and the issues are all about. And that's how it develops. You will notice how it develops through the conflict with one another. Like, these two has a conflict and this guy integrates it, and when this guy integrates it, something is missing, someone adds another. So that's how it develops over time. Your company CEO called you to her office regarding your proposal to add new PIR to your selection process. She wanted to know whether such addition would be worthy of her investment and would actually increase the overall profits of the company. As a psychometrician, how would you find out whether such addition is beneficial or not? A. BCG, B. Taylor-Russell, C. Naylor-Shine, or D. Loshi? And the correct answer is letter A, BCG. So, hindi po yan BGC lugar yun. BCG is the Brogden-Cronbach-Glesser formula. Literally, it means you calculating the dollar amount of a utility gain or the estimate of the benefit of using a test or selection method resulting from the use of a particular selection instrument under specified conditions. Basically, magkano ba yung kikitain ng kumpanya kapag ginamit tong test na to? And there are variables there that they consider. We are not going to talk about the formula here because we're not statistician or mathematician, and we really have no way of evaluating whether that formula works or whether that formula is true. That is up for another higher level work and higher level studies in psychology. So, but that's the purpose of the BCG. It's for quantifying the amount of dollars you gain by using a particular test. And then there's Naylor-Shine. It is the likely average increase in criterion performance as a result of using a particular test for intervention, and also provides selection ratio needed to achieve a particular increase in criterion performance. So let's say you have 10 salesmen, and on average they can sell 5 sales of your product out of 100 prospects. Pag gumamit ka ng Naylor-Shine, tapos ginamit mo yung test in your selection process, malalaman mo kung gaano ba niya may improve yung performance ng sales mo. So maybe, pag gamit mo ng test, ang nangyari na, yung salesman na na-hire mo, on average, they can close and sell your product. 8 sales in every 100 prospects. So ganun siya. Loshi naman is to find out the probability that our particular applicant will be successful. So, Loshi table, when you use Loshi table, nag-hire ka, you get to know, kunwari, hinire mo ako as psychometrician, and you use the Loshi table while taking into account yung mga test na ginamit mo and all the variables, malalaman mo na, pag hinire ko tong psychometrician na to, he has a 90% probability of being successful. And we define successful here by you being able to perform well in the job. So, nag-hire ka kunwari rin ng salesman, tapos para sa company mo, successful na kapag nakaka-close ng 10 sales in a month. So, yun yung Loshi table. What are the probability na itong hinahire kong salesman, kaya niya mag-close ng 10 sales in a month? Expectancy chart naman is that the likelihood that individuals who score within a given range on the predictor will perform successfully on the criterion. So, let's say psychometrician, no? And you want to be able to predict kung sino ba yung mga psychometrician na hire mo ang magpe-perform ng maayos. And your predictor na ginamit mo is yung board exam average. Using an expectancy table, usually, makikita mo dyang details, ganito yan. Let's say, naka 40 out of 100 ako sa board exam. For some reason, in a parallel universe, pasado na yun. Psychometrician na ako. 40 out of 100. And I predict na magiging successful yung naka 40 out of 100 in 30%. 30%. Ngayon, the higher it is, maybe naka 90 out of 100 ka. Ang prediction na sa'yo is 95% out of 100. So, ganun yung makikita mo sa expectancy charts. So, we have here a table of all the utility technique and their respective definitions. The key here, since they are utility technique and they are techniques, the key for techniques is the application. Every technique, what matters in every technique is the application. The final exam for basic conversational French was used to predict test takers' learning potential for advanced conversational French. In this scenario, the final exam for basic conversational French would be considered as A. Achievement test, B. Aptitude test, C. Prognostic test, or D. All of the above. The correct answer is letter A. Achievement test. So, in this regard, no, ba't ganun, sir? Di ba learning potential? Di ba pag potential dapat aptitude? Ba't hindi aptitude? Well, in this regard kasi, yung basic conversational French, ginamit siya as a final exam. Therefore, ginamit siya as a way to what? Ginamit siya as a way to identify students' achievement dun sa basic conversational French. However, it was also used as a predictive factor in learning potential for advanced calculus. So, in this case kasi, nag-overlap talaga sila. My point naman, tama din naman yung aptitude. It could be used depending on the circumstances. However, mas nangingibabaw dito yung achievement because it's a final exam. Ang point lang is, may overlap talaga yung achievement and aptitude. And sometimes, it could be confusing. And yung prognostic, that's just the aptitude test called in another way. So, isang tawag lang yan, no? Prognostic aptitude, pareho lang yan. Wala yung pinagkaiba. So, yun. Pero pwede rin yung aptitude. But mas correct lang this case yung achievement because it's a final exam. O is to O as X is to blank. The statement above can be considered an item for blank. A. Achievement test, B. Aptitude test, C. Prognostic test, or D. All of the above. And the correct answer is letter D. All of the above. Again, yung aptitude and prognostic, they are the same. However, dito kasi sa number 46 as compared dun sa number 45, wala tayong context kung saan ginamit yung item. Like, what if you took a course on verbal analogy? This is an example of a verbal analogy item. Right? So, kung tinetest yung achievement mo or accomplishment mo or yung natutunan mo sa course sa verbal analogy, it could be an achievement test. And if you are being tested naman sa abstract thinking, wherein you are asked to identify the relationship between random variables, like this one, then it could be an aptitude test, right? So, since wala tayong context, it could be all of the above. As compared dun sa nauna nating item, we have a context. It's a final exam. When the test taker agrees with whatever is presented, this is an example of blank. A. Acquiescence, B. Overly positive, C. Non-acquiescence, or D. Faking good. And the answer is letter A. Acquiescence. So, ano ba to? Ano ba tong tinatanong natin dito? Basically, you are being asked about a definition of the response style. What is a response style? It is the tendency of the test taker to answer in a particular pattern. And again, we are talking about human beings when we conduct psychological assessment or testing. And sometimes, human beings, us, we do not want to cooperate. Right? That's why ang MMPI may validity scales to help them identify the response style So that alam nila if nagko-cooperate ba yung client or not. So what are the different response styles? First, we have a socially desirable responding to present oneself in a favorable light. So, yun yung mga tao na ang sinasagot nila is yung socially desirable. So, kunwari, you are applying for a job and bigyan ka ng neophy. Tapos, alam mo na kailangan masipag ka. So, lahat ng question like, I am hardworking. Very agree ka dun. Tapos, I stop before I complete my goals. Very disagree ka dun. So, you are trying to manipulate the results instead of being truthful about the test so that you appear in a socially desirable way. Acquiescence naman is you agree with whatever is presented. So, kunwari, I am sad all the time. Very agree ka naman dun. Tapos, strongly agree ka dun. Tapos, I am happy all the time. Strongly agree ka pa rin dun. I am anxious all the time. Strongly agree ka pa rin. Nako, hindi mo na binasa yung questions. So, mahuhuli ka na nung test developers. Hindi to nag-cooperate, hindi inayos yung sagot. Acquiescence to, acquiescence. Non-acquiescence naman is the opposite of acquiescence, which means you just disagree. So, I am happy all the time. Disagree. I mean, wala ka na yatang nararamdaman, sir. Ano na ba talaga? Deviance. Deviance means to make unusual or uncommon response. So, kunwari, completion item. What time do you wake up? Ang sagot mo, cheese. Or ang sinagot mo, laptop. O, diba? Nalito na yung test developer sa'yo. Parang trinip-tripan mo na lang sila. Extreme naman is hindi ka naglalagay ng middle rating, no? Wala sa yung sakto lang. Either strongly agree ka or strongly disagree ka lang. Gambling cautiousness, you guess or you're just guessing your answers. And overly positive. So sa gambling or cautiousness, it doesn't make sense yung mga sagot, no? Like, hindi rin siya laging yes, hindi rin siya laging no, hindi rin siya laging middle. Pero it just doesn't make sense in some ways. Like, the related items, for some reason, the answers, you just can't make sense out of it. It's difficult to interpret. So, mapapansin mo siya. That's gambling. And with overly positive, closely related siya sa socially desirable, where you claim extreme virtue through self-presentation in a superlative manner. If Brandon believes that he only passed his math exam because he was lucky, this would imply that he has A or an A, internal locus of control, B, external locus of control, C, high score in conscientiousness, or D, low score in conscientiousness. And the correct answer is letter B, external locus of control. So what is locus of control? Basically, it's your perception about the source of things that happen to you. So kunwari, lumabas ka, wala kang dalang payong, biglang umulan, tapos sinabi mong malas. Malas? Ano ba naman yan, G? Bakit mo naman pinaulan? In that sense, you have an external locus of control because you are attributing the rain and you being wet because of that to an outside source. It's something outside you. But then again, there is always a possibility of raining in a day. Kahit paanong prediction dyan or forecast, weather forecast, there is always a possibility of raining. So kung may internal locus of control ka naman, sasabihin mo sa sarili mo, dapat kasi nagdala akong payong, kasalanan ko to kaya ako nababasa ngayon. So that's an example of internal locus of control. Yung conscientiousness, it's just a variable or a factor in Big Five. So usually yung mga high in conscientiousness, yan yung mga masisipag, responsible, detail-oriented. Pag mga low scores in conscientiousness naman, yan yung usually yung spontaneous, impulsive, not very responsible. I'm not saying that we're putting them in a negative or positive light. Sa personality naman, wala namang negative or positive. Each has its own strengths and weaknesses. Like for people in high in conscientiousness, they might be rigid sometimes, about their schedules and all that. Whereas with low conscientiousness, you are more flexible. So it really depends. Neo-PI-R uses the blank approach to personality assessment. A, nomothetic, B, geographic, C, factor analytic, or D, interactionism. The correct answer is letter A, nomothetic. So yung factor analytic, yes, gumamit din ng factor analysis yung Neo-PI-R. And yes, meron talagang, like they integrated it with other researchers and then they combined the factor analytic studies of past researchers and came up with the conclusion that there is a 5 big factors. So it can be correct too, but I want to ask you here whether you know if it's a nomothetic or an idiographic approach. Is it nomothetic or idiographic? What's the difference between nomothetic and idiographic? For nomothetic, it assumes that everyone is the same. And with the UPIR, it assumes that all of us has a degree of openness, conscientiousness, extraversion, agreeableness, or neuroticism. All of us have that personality traits. It's just magkakaiba nga lang yung degree na napopossess natin. And in that sense, if you look at this, it is looking at the similarities of everyone in terms of personality. So that is nomothetic. For idiographic naman, which is commonly used by Gordon Allport, it is acknowledging the uniqueness of the individual. So, kung naalala niyo sa TOP, yung in-study niya yung letters from Jenny, tapos he deduced various traits and characteristics of the person using those letters. So, if you're using an idiographic approach, you will do that for every patient, you know. You will study their life, study some factors about their life, and then you try to make sense of the characteristics that they possess. So, unlike sa NeoPIR na you can conduct a group test and then suddenly you can figure out how much openness, conscientiousness, or which trait this person possess in a certain degree. So, that's the difference between nomothetic and idiographic. Which of the following items is a good item? A. Item 1, B. Item 2, C. Item 3, or D. All of the above. And the correct answer is letter B, item 2. So this time, medyo statistical siya. We are going to understand how to interpret item characteristic curves. So what is an item characteristic curve? Basically, yung mga nakikita nyo dyan na linear graphs, yan yung item characteristic curve. At the bottom side is, at the x-axis, that is the ability. And at the y-axis is what we call the probability of correct response. Now, I want you to remember this, ha? A good item would have a characteristic curve that is the greater the ability, the more probability of a correct response. So, for instance, gumawa ako ng test sa mathematics. Ngayon, may item ako na ang mga nakakasagot, yung mga mababa ang score, tapos ang mga nagkakamali, yung mga matatalino sa klase ko. Well, that will be a bad item. Kasi, yung may mga matataas ang mathematical ability, yun pa yung nagkakamali. Like, imagine mo ikaw, tapos si Einstein, yung item sa math, ikaw yung tumama, mali si Einstein. Like, or ikaw yung tumama, mali si Newton. Like, that doesn't really make sense, right? And in another sense naman, if an item, tumama si Einstein at si Newton, tapos mali ka, well, that makes sense because they are geniuses. They have very high mathematical ability. So, yun, no? So, if you look at this curve, let's look at item 1, no? Pag tinignan mo tong item 1, pa-curve siya, para siyang chocolate hills, it doesn't make sense. Kasi let's say, mali nga, kunwari, grade 1 ka, kunwari may grade 1, may high school student, and then may mathematician. Yung grade 1, nagbigay ka ngayon ng algebra question. Yung grade 1 mali. Hindi kasi marunong ng algebra. It makes sense. Nasa left side sila, low ability, low mathematical ability kasi grade 1 pa lang. Ikaw ngayon na high school, you know algebra, tumama ka. And then suddenly, in that item, yung mathematician sumagot, nagkamali. Kasi nakikita mo, nandito siya sa dulo mataas yung ability niya, but the probability of correct response mababa. It doesn't make sense. Therefore, it is a bad item. The second one, why is it good? Well, as you can see here, pataas siya. Habang gumagaling, mas tumataas yung probability na tumama. Well, it makes sense. I mean, let's go back to the example. Algebra student, grade 1, mathematician. So, kung mathematician ka, mas mataas yung odds mo na tumama sa math question. Right? Because you're more trained, you have more ability. And dito naman sa item 3, so makikita mo dito, at some point, mali. And whoop, tama. This could be a good item. Why could this be a good item? I mean, out of all the 3, the best item is the one with the linear curve, linear line, right? The straight line, di na paangat. But, in this case, tama siya kasi what if yung question mo is about basic lang, x plus 2 equals 10. So, hindi siya kaya sagutin ng grade 1. It makes sense. Low ability, walang nakakasagot sa low ability. But at dumating ka sa certain point, you studied algebra, you know basic algebra, tama ka na. So, paangat siya ng paangat. And now, it doesn't matter kung second year high school, third year high school, fourth year high school, college, mathematician, pare-pareho lang sila ng probability of correct response kasi madali lang yung item. Right? So, it could still be a good item, but of all the 3, the best item is the one with a linear line.